Back when I was in secondary school, and even later at university, I used to like scribbling my name on the desk. I don't know about you. My fingers would be itching to leaving behind the mark. Clare was here, or Clare loves A. It was something of a challenge to not get caught. If I didn't get caught, it meant I'd won. Or maybe it was something more than just a challenge, a declaration, a signal that would show whoever came after me that I'd been there before, that I'd been there first, I'd marked my territory. Nowadays, as a lecturer to the university sixth form, I realize that young people no longer scratch their names into the desks in the lecture halls to show they have been there to leave a letter, mark a signal, if only to challenge my authority. And yet they still mark their territory. From one week to another, most of the students sit on the same side. There are those who always sit in the front, there are always those who sit in the back, there are those who go to the left or to the right. Often they even sit at the same desk. They don't scratch their mark onto it using a pen. They have other means at their disposal to tell themselves and their friends and the whole world at the same time probably that they were there or where they would be. These days school desks are strewn with mobiles and tablets, and thus also with the social media networks that each and one of us are on all the time: Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And it's possible that our Facebook wall functions as a territory where we all say what is it we're doing all the time to everyone, everywhere, at the same time. Clare is now going to the loo, or Clare is eating a piece of chocolate cake. When I was invited here to talk about Maltese literature and my own writing, I told myself, fine, I'll go. This is my territory after all. I know where its frontiers lie, I know its borders, its confines. To talk about your literature is to describe it, right? To recount its narrative. But it also means that even in the very act of narrating, you're creating your own borders, depending on your perspective, depending on where you're standing. So I asked myself how to begin narrating a story that would be sufficiently interesting and sufficiently different in 3/4 of an hour or an hour. I could play it safe and tell it the way it was told to me, which would entail a lot of name dropping, from Postrgatudate in 1450 to the present day. Or I could tell it by traversing a number of different themes, from Imbramti, my home or my dwelling, in Postrgatudate's poem, to the detention centres of today, featuring in my own writing and other writers like Adrian Rima and Manuel Mifsud and Karl Cambry, Walid Napan. But in this limited span of time, what names should I mention? Which should I leave out? Which themes should I grapple with, and how should I narrate them? Where should I draw my lines and direct my borders? Presumably things would be easier if Maltese literature had its own canon. I could then just talk about the writers who are considered canonica. But the canon itself is constituted of borders, no? An enclosed, somewhat restricted space. I would have ended up talking about a small number of writers, selected by a small number of people, according to their own proclivities. A good thing then that the Maltese literature does not have a canon, which might mean that we are all equally good, or all equally bad. That's assuming, of course, that the canon is not in fact in our heads. When you discuss the literature of a nation, you inevitably draw borders, lines and limits, and then it's a matter of being in or out. It's possible to negotiate, of course, or one might choose not to negotiate and at all, and instead to take the decision to face up to the usual story, the story that is familiar to everyone, and to recount it in an entirely novel way. Now, a lot of time, in the way we tell ourselves our story of our literature, woman is entirely forgotten. Our narrative centers around the year 1964, that's the year of our independence. The protagonists are the pre-independence writers and the post-independence writers. All the writers are male, it's all very, very masculine. And for a long time, Maltese literature, the literature I myself formed part of, did not narrate its women writers. It omitted many things from its official narrative. And to this day, women are not the protagonists. Now, as I was thinking about this talk about borders and frontiers and negotiation, I decided not to tell the story of my literature the way I was told it. So today, you won't be hearing much about Maltese men who wrote about the sturdy, beautiful, and mysterious women. Women who tilled the land and bore children. Women who rocked their children's cradle and gave succor. Women who were temptresses, or who, in the word of a man in a suit, were the object of the male gaze. Today, very consciously, I propose to talk to you exclusively about the second sex. I don't feel I'm being particularly partisan here. After all, the male Maltese writer has already rather extensively, perhaps too extensively, written about himself and about himself. Then again, you could, if you were so inclined, Google Maltese literature right now, and the first URL that would crop up, the Wikipedia link probably, would present you with a long list of names of men. As a matter of fact, the first list in this first link consists entirely of men. Then there is a second list with all the books and novels written only by men. And then at the very, very, very end, there is a token mention of feminism. And of course, naturally enough, leads to the mention of 4 or 5 women. At this juncture, it's worth stating that today I too shall be erecting my own walls and excluding from within them the male sex. All the men who left their names, their initials, on the cover of a book or many other books. And with a Medusa smile playing on my lips, I hereby declare that I, over the next few minutes, will only narrate women. My take won't be rooted in academic discourse, for that is not my field. I shall instead speak as a writer and a reader, and while I give you a taste of some of the verses of women writers, I'll also be reading fragments of my own women. Women who left their names behind in a recent collection of short stories that I published. I'd like to think that you won't see this choice, the choice of reading excerpts from my own work, among many others, as an egocentric one. I trust you'll understand that it's a choice that stems from the fact that my practice, when it comes to writing, is first and foremost fiction. And so, I'd like to ask you to consider the fictional pieces I shall read as themselves forming an integral part of the argument I shall try to make today. Everywhere that Polly went, she'd leave her mark. A small squiggle on the wall, a scratch on a bench or a door, on an iron railing, on the ground, on a rubbish bin, on a bus seat, on a bus stop. 3 small letters, P-D-M. Barely visible, carved with a 2-cent coin on some of the headstones in the graveyard, on the soles of shoes, on Frazzle the tabby cat, on the telephone kiosk, on the thoughts of children, on the tresses of her dolls, on the lampposts, on the door to the band club, on the tears that people wept when the coffin arrived, on the wooden kiosk in the square, on washing hung out dry, on stray dogs in the street, on newspapers, on street signs, on the chairs in the sacristy, on her mother and father's tomb, on cigarette butts, on her pipe, on the facades of houses, on dust motes in the air, in the hem of her skirts, 3 tiny letters, PDM. And it wasn't always with a 2-cent coin that she left her mark. Sometimes she used needle and thread. Sometimes it was paint, sometimes a piece of chalk or a stone, on the asphalt, on the pavements, on the vending machines, on the merry-go-round, on the tables and bars, in the central box, or in the public latrine, on the census forms that she never filled out, on husks of dried bread, on paper money, on her pension check, on tins of tobacco, on lemonade bottles, on tins of corned beef, on the rubber wall, on the surface of the sea, on the telephone directory, on the granaries, on window panes, on a cloudy sky, on the rocks, on the beach, on the sand, on her pillow, on children's games, on people's footsteps, on her bed, on the chair, on the table, on the stepped streets, on the wind, on the wishes of children, on sadness, on solitude, on anything and everything, everywhere she happened to be, everywhere she went, except for her own grave. Polly left her mark. 3 tiny letters, even on her heart. 3 tiny letters, PDM. Polly is the woman who turns up in all the stories of my latest collection. The idea is loosely inspired by the films of Krzysztof Kieslowski. In his trilogy, Three Colors, Blue, White and Red, there are three elderly people who are, so to speak, just passing through. They're always recycling bottles. In blue, for instance, Julie doesn't even notice the old woman. In white, Carol spots the old man reaching up, trying to, and failing to slip the bottle through the opening in the recycling bin. It doesn't help him. In red, Valentine actually gives the old woman a hand, as she can't manage to reach up to the opening in the recycling bin. Polly passes through. Sometimes she's collecting used bottles, sometimes she's leaving a mark, sometimes she can be heard mumbling words that nobody can understand, and sometimes she's just waving her arms. Some of the characters in my story see her but pay no attention to her. Some of them don't even see her. Some look askance. Polly is never the protagonist. Not even in the story that bears her name, the last one in the collection. There, the protagonist is, in a manner of speaking, the man, he whom she idolizes, PDM, Perit Dolmintov, who was one of our prime ministers back in the 70s, whose initials she leaves behind everywhere she goes. Polly, in this patriarchal society, is the woman who's left outside. Society has taken everything from her and has given her nothing back. Even the words she speaks, they are also not her own. Polly never married. When her mother died, her father had already been dead 12 years, and she let the ugliness of an empty house fill up her remaining days. She never left her childhood home. At least she could take comfort in the unchanging yellow of the walls, the same narrow streets and the washing hung on the plastic lines. There, at least, she could harbor the memories that lurked in every wound, borne by every piece of furniture, and the silence of every wall, and the listlessness of chairs, the table, and the sofa. She's known as the shrew, Polly. At least that's how the other women refer to her, as if they were in themselves shrews, eavesdroppers, tattlers, brawlers. Their eyes twitching and the slightest breath, sound, closing door, opening shutter, new panties on the clothesline. In actual fact, Polly was known as Talbuzu, because that was how her grandpa, her mother's father, was known, and she inherited the nickname. When she turned 40, her head began to resemble a potato with little sprouts. Her arms, one of her arms, her left, was much shorter than the other. It barely extended to her large, sagging breasts. That hand was always clutching a pipe. She was ugly, Polly, really ugly. Not just because of the handicap she'd been born with, but also because there was nothing attractive about her face. Her eyes were dull, forever goggling. Her mouth brown and always tending to attraction were an important part of the geography of her sallow countenance. Her teeth were a ruin, black and gappy. A pink stain spread across her neck. Her ears were too small for her head, which was too large for her narrow shoulders. Her legs were riddled with veins, and she wore brown flip-flops and a pair of filthy socks. Perhaps before coming here today, some of you asked, what is Maltese literature? A lot of the time, we consider this literature as a body of work, poetry and prose, written in Maltese. Most writers do indeed write in Maltese, and then get translated in other languages. But a number of Maltese writers write in English, and there are some writers who are not Maltese, but have lived in Malta for a long time and have chosen to write in Maltese. A good example is Walid Napan, a Palestinian who has resided in Malta for the last 25 years and has just won the European Prize for Literature, like Antonis last year. For practical reasons, today I shall only go into works written in Maltese, except for one or two maybe. But let me, however, note in passing that the Maltese language itself might be a good metaphor for the sort of argument I'm making about borders and canyons and frontiers today. The language is Semitic, but has had very intensive contact with Romance and English. Many of its speakers are bilingual, and so it too resists the easy categorization that one is so often tempted to make. What is its quintessence, after all? Call it Semitic, if you will. But that characterization is ruptured by the intrusion of word formation rules borrowed from Italian, syntax that sometimes models itself on English, or code switching, eruptions. presences that I find are not unlike the elderly people who posture Kieslowski movie, or Polly, whose marks are left behind in other people's stories. But I digress. What a better way to get a taste of the language and its literature than to hear it at its origins, or at least at the point where these eruptions do not seem to have started taking place. Here then is the poem by Peter Kasharo from 1450. It's also on your handout, the Maltese version of it, and an approximate English translation. And this is read by Martin Zamit.
شدوا القدر يا جيراني تعال نحدثكم ما انصاب في الواري ولا انصاب في عمركم قلب ما عندها حاكم سلطان ولا مولى بيرم غميق رمتني بترجم مقصولة فين حيران على الغرقة ننزل في ترج منزلي نطلع ونرجع ننزل دايم في البحر العالي وقت هي مرمتي لي زمان نبني ما اخترتليش معلمين مختاري طفل مرخي فين مي تنسيب الجبل سب طفل مرخي وقت هي مرمتي نزلت هي للسيسان ما اخترتليش لمعلمين ما قطعت للجبال فين مي تنسيب الجبل سب طفل مرخي وقت هم رمتي لي زمان نبني وقت هم رمتي وارجع بنيها بدلها انت المكان اللي يوتيها من بدل المكان بدل الفنتورة علاش لي راضي على كل شبر صورة همر بيضة وهمر سودة حمرة أكتر من هداونا طرت منا تمر.
What you've just heard is the first piece of writing in verse, which was discovered quite by coincidence in the 60s in the notarial archives in Valletta. It's known as the Cantilena by Peter Kasharo, and in it, Kasharo laments the fact that the home he'd worked for a long time to build had collapsed, for its bedrock was turned out to be clay. It's a piece that could easily be read as allegorical. In Ramti, the home, my dwelling, of which he speaks, could be thought of as an allegory of love, or something else important in his life, which came to an end and left him feeling bereft. This is the only poem that goes so far back in time, unless there are more which have yet not to be discovered or have been lost forever, perhaps even some written by women. For the rest, as I've already mentioned, the narrative of our literature tends to focus on pre-independence and post-independence writers, or if you like, writers of the first half of the 20th century and the second half of the 20th century, with some sporadic instances from the 19th century. Among the pre-independence writers, there are Rosa Berfa, the poet of solitude, Anton Buttigieg, the poet of nature, Carmelo Vassallo, the poet of fire, Tunkar Msaila, the national poet. Their themes were patriotism, nationalism, nature, faith, the nation imagined as unified, victorious, ever engaged in a struggle against the other, themes that were probably called for given that the country was a British colony. Among the post-independence writers, we find Daniel Massa, Oliver Frigeri, Joe Frigeri, Alfred Buttigieg, and many more. These writers began to break away and work against the grain of traditional forms, as well as shy away from the idyllic portrayal of the Maltese as a united nation. These writers took a more critical view of the nation's leaders and of the Maltese, whom they characterized, in the words of Victor Fenet, as poplu riet trush umutu, a nation slumbering, deaf and dumb. Then from the 1990s onwards, there is a new label, the so-called New Wave. Among them, Emmanuel Nusud, Adrian Riemann, Norbert Bujaya, Antoine Cassar, and so on. But my task today is not to reel off lists, and instead I'd like to turn to the first among the women, Mary Mela, the only woman writer, born in 1905, the only woman writer of the pre-independence generation, though her work is not widely known, and very, very few have felt the need to celebrate her poetry. Key themes in her poetry include nature, the nation, religious faith, of course. Her poetry is marked by its simplicity, its eye for the minute detail, constant anthropomorphizing humor, utopia, and optimism. In the book, Villa Melak, the poet invents and describes an entire world of utopia, a utopia that lies beyond the gates of an enormous villa. She describes this place by day, by night, in winter and summer. She describes everything to the smallest detail, anthropomorphizes many, many creatures, from fly to silkworm, flowers to springs. Even the butler is a parrot, who just can't be taught how to distinguish men from women. But what's remarkable about this villa is that not one of her friends and relatives are alive. She memorializes them by inscribing a monument to each and every one of them. The villa is in fact strewn with monuments to her mother, her father, her brothers, her aunts. And instead of giving them life the way she does with each and every insect, animal, flower, plant, or tree, she erects a monument to the human denizens of the villa, fossilizes them, almost as if they were intent on preserving them for eternity, never budging, but in the most extraordinary way. Apart from all this, Melak talks about men and women differently. I'll just read the first one in your handouts, Monument Giuseppe Melak. Among other things, her brother is Eżaqqiq, Neffiq, u xħin id-dar jinġabar imqaxqax żgura x'nefaq kull ma kellu u bla kuraġġ u jibżam qar minn dellu. U xalatur u żufjettu sal darba, qatt festa bieħ ma ġiet skappat u għaddiet. And her other brother, for example, Monument Tarcisio Melak, is always qalbu sewda, jew mhux f'siktu, ipejjeb kemm fid-dinja hemm sigaretti magħmul għalih u f'kollox iżhom lura. But when it comes to women, on the other hand, she has nothing negative to say. I'll take one example about her mother, Monument Mananni Melak. Beautiful, yet in her old age. Imagine her when she was young, light-hearted as they come, hardworking, sensible, molded out of music, art, and fantasy. She even hints, and this was back in the 40s, and for Maltese was something like totally new, at some regret at her mother's having married. Had she not had to take care of the home and the children, she would have been a good writer, she says, a trailblazer, and would have been a gift to the language. So much that she compares her to Columbus. And now I read this stanza on Mananni Melak. Li kieku hija wkoll ta' truħa l-kidba, Kolombu kienet tkun għall-Zintana. Imgħażlet il-missieri u bennet lili, flok qadet tikkomponi bħali lana. After all, this is perhaps the reason why the women writers are so few in the story of our literature. A patriarchal, Catholic, social structure that always thought of women in a domestic setting. One final word on the poetry of Melak. I'd like to make a reference to two ballads from another of her collections, album. Both of them have female heroines who are marked for their bravery. In Gretz il Guerriera, Grace the Warrior, a female warrior leads the conqueror soldiers in a battle against the Arabs and emerges victorious. Here, what's interesting is the way Melak subverts the traditional narrative to some degree. I mean, there's still the Muslim enemy, who is also found in the poetry of her male counterparts, but the leading role is played by a woman. Abdu l-armi, rigbu żwiemel, huma wara Gretz quddiem, u r-riġment tal-kontra l-ara qiegħda tmexxi mingħajr kliem. And then in another ballad, the Destiny of Saint Clement, the Destiny of Saint Clement, the admiral of the fleet is cowardly and runs off when he has to face the Turkish fleet. His wife, who accompanies him on board the ship, does not want a coward and a traitor for a husband, and so she jumps into the water and swims to a nearby boat and asks fishermen to take her to shore. And I quote, Mart Saint Clement demma Malti. E kif ratu qed jiżgiċċa daret fuq u daqs il-Junessa, xtaqet qatta u biċċa biċċa. Qaltlu, jekk m'intix se ddawwar sabiex tħares lin-nies tiegħek, ibqa' żgur li l-baħar naqbes u dal-vjaġġ ma nkomplihx miegħek. So, Mary Melak is the only pre-independence woman we know of. Among the post-independence women poets, there is Doreen McAuliffe, whose work I used to study when I was in sixth form. Her poems are easy to recognize. As you can see in your handout, the words and the verses scroll across the page as fragmented as the feminine eye that she writes about. The style that Micallef writes in is fragmentary, and her thoughts seem to have been written on the page exactly the moment they were taught. Fitriq tal-Empirew, għax jiena Merkurju, pjaneta taqbad sarubi, ħarrab tal-infern sa moħħi sa qalbi, ħajpattu, ħajbatu, ħajjetu għalik, skorpjun fid-desert, urini lil-lalla, missieri. This poetry is confessional, free in its form, free also of the strictures of punctuation and grammatical rules. The language, the themes, differ considerably from the language and themes used by other modernists who were her contemporaries. U għajnejja tberħu fuq kull sewwa fija nifsi, moħħi kristallizza salibat irkejjen miżlieġa u ruħi meħlusa, issa sirt mara. In the few anthologies that she published, Doreen Micallef wrote about woman, the body of woman and women's sorrow, silence and suffering. Many times she appears to be in conversation with some other, possibly her father, her lover, a random person, even Christ, even God. Often this other, who is often male, does not understand what she means, does not respond, always leaves her many questions unanswered. Her sporadic verses contain allusions not only to Christian theology, but also to Oriental philosophies, religions, astrology, alchemy, among other sources. And I read just one final bit from Prophetic. Kull meta l-biki tiegħi int ma tisimgħux, għax widnejk miżdudin biħsibijietek, għall-inqas ħares lejja, jekk ma tifhimniex. F'wiċċi taqrax is-sigriet bejn is-snuk tal-verità għax jiena timbagħti bħal għajja taċċellu ftit qabel imut. Arani.
This story, if it was ever caught between parentheses, is surely no longer trapped there. I'd like to give you a sense of the frankness with which Nadia Mifsud, in her long poem parenthesis, describes an erotic moment on a sofa that is somewhat unsteady, a moment called between parentheses on a certain day, day 4. It appears to be an isolated moment, away from the world, and yet it is also laden with memories of motherhood and children, of moods and musts. And then I'll follow immediately with another sensual erotic moment, this time a moment of drunkenness, a moment that is embroidered, albeit on clay, a moment engraved but in darkness, in the inimitable style of Claudia Gauci, from her poem Hangover. So I start with the piece from parenthesis by Nadia Mifsud. Day 4, Il-Rabayum. Ras ma ras fuq dassu fan zlugat, subaj kien fexxew jien kull zokorti. Imbatet li fuq ommo kull ħadida tal-modija li kienet teddek biha, kull darba li l-imbit irħis ma kienx jesadmuh u l-ħolm imdewwet tagħha. Xtaqt li l-ġufi jibilek dak il-ħin. Xtaqt nista' nweldek dak il-ħin, inħobbok minn fuq s'isfel u dawra mejt. Eżatt kif inħobb il-lulidi. Xtaqt natik il-sidri, nitimak il-fsiet, nisqik iż-żejil, insikket biżetek, ħabbejtek ftit iktar dak il-ħin. Jien mbennen il-ħsibijietek tqal u fimt aħjar il-għala il-ħitan ta' darek kienu kollha kulur differenti, kulur għal kull burdata, qetli. Aktar tard biex mara lewn il-fidda titħeddel f'ħoġri ħadd gost nisimak, tħolli s-suppostijiet kollha u terġa' ddommhom mod ieħor, kullana bews madwar onqi. Hangover. Dil-gżira niżżilta morra f'nifs bħal grok. It-tafal ir-rakmat fuq ġembea għoljiet ma sakrekx u qas ma tħajjart tinżel għal kubtejk. Rasek fiħdana tal-bellus, is-sof bil-mod, ix-xita fitla, tistriħ fil-qieħ. Oġbitni, qedli, u tajtni darek silwett sewdini, jitnaqqax binkejja fid-dalma tal-blat. Ħsibta se tieħdok dil-gżira u tħallik imkebbeb fuq sidira ma tarax art. Ħsibta se tredek biġmiela dil-gżira, Tlegliga sal-qiegħ tibqa' għax imbissem bil-baħar ileq mitluq roqaħ dejn rasek. Ħsibtek rajtni nistenna niswiet fil-qabex biex tiġi dduqni. Ninżillek bħal duwa fl-ewwel dija. These writers, these women, to whose voices I will shortly add Simone and Abigail, are unflinching when they write about their sexuality and a woman's experience of it. They are also not reluctant to problematize it. They do not hesitate to write about the abuse and exploitation of women's bodies, sexual and domestic violence. Neither are they afraid to problematize motherhood and maternity, and they refuse, as Adrian Rima writes, to perpetuate the patriarchal culture on which much of Moti's literature has stood, and to propose a literature and discourse about literature that explores other value systems and perspectives and experiences. An Elegy for My Siblings by Simone Ngwanes. Elegija għal-ħuti sejrin. Ma, il-ħieltom li refat juġani, u forsi juġa li l-ek ukoll xi daqqiet. Għad baqa ħuti fik imsakrin, se nifgawhom. And one more poem by Abigail, who has just published recently a collection in English, No More Stolen Sisters. I think you don't have it in your handout. I will read in English because it was written in English. Inspired by an Amnesty International report on violence on Indigenous women in Canada back in 2014. They're indentured to your land, channeled into the snouts of rivers. They're indentured to your land, channeled into the snouts of rivers, quarantined until you find it fit to feed them morsel and water. Every day, they lie with you until the sun dips behind their irises. Every day, they grow coal black, insurgent. All I want is to play foul with your canals, piss in the irrigation ditch, spit bile into the V of your breastplate. For these paper women, strung by white palms, I'll rip my ovaries apart, pickle them with bloodshot verbs, raise a blasphemous keening. In my last book, The Names They Left Behind, I chose to write about the idiosyncrasies of different women, their tragedies, perplexities, the complex worlds they navigate, mournful at times, triumphant at other times, and their obsessions and routines. I'm often asked whether there are traces of myself in these women, or whether there are any aspects of these women that are mine. They're not questions I find it easy to answer, but I do often choose to go beyond the purely personal in my writing. Often I just tell stories about women who are invisible, who do not really speak out, who cannot tell their story, whom we tend to ignore, or whose story we really don't see. Rita, for example, lives in Stepney Green, not far from Whitechapel. She left Malta in the 60s with her husband, who went to London in search for a better job. They now have voted in favor for Brexit. They ended up spending the rest of their lives here. This excerpt I'm about to read, is the opening of the story of Rita. Rita turns up at 6 minutes to 8. The coat she bought from Petcoat Lane the previous winter hanging limp about her, with crumbs of toasts on her lapels, bedded dreams in her mouth, eyes misted over with the smells of curry and basmati rice. The train arrives just a few seconds after she turns up on the platform in Stepney Green. It drives the silence before it, and she allows it all to invade her. She doesn't move. People scurry past her like rats, some making for a carriage, some for another, some for the staircase. After a few seconds, the door all slams shut at the same time, and the train leaves. Rita renders the silence back. She then sits down on one of the chairs bolted to the wall, covered with filthy white tiles. There is a metro on the chair next to hers, and she picks it up, glances at the daily dose of gossip, colorless like the night, like Salvo, she thinks. Salvo's like the night, and the metro's like Salvo, who's like the night. At 4 minutes to 8, another train stops. This time she gets on. The paper is left behind. She sits on the first seat she finds. There's a paper on the seat next to her. She picks it up It's identical to the one she left behind at the station, and she carries on reading. Where had she left off? 2 stops later, Aldgate East, after exactly 4 minutes and 56 seconds, she gets off. The metro she leaves behind on the seat. She gets to her feet with 1 step, 2 steps. She gets off the train and stops short. Waits as people push past her in a hurry. Waits as people throw her dirty looks because she stood in the middle and they need to get a move on. Waits as the train collects more weariness and more dirty boots. It's raining out. She waits as the train leaves and her coat is whipped about her to the left. Then a silence engulfs her for about 20 seconds. A first step, then another. Little by little, she begins to climb the stairs, a trail of silence in her wake, until she's outside in the rain. She starts walking towards the school, Canon Barnett Primary School. It's 8:07. The bell goes off at 8:30. Up the stairs to the main door. The smell of detergent greets her as she walks across the kitchen. Linda's reading the Metro and drinking her coffee. Morning, Rita. Your coffin's waiting. She goes, excuse my cockney, she goes and pours herself some coffee. Had a bad dream? No, Linda. How you feeling this morning? Not bad, Linda. And you? I'm all right. Raining, innit? Yes, Linda. Bloody weather this, innit? When she's finished her coffee, she lifts the sack of potatoes onto the table. The first hour and a half of her day, she spends peeling potatoes and trying to think of how many potatoes she's peeled these last 20 years. She hasn't managed to work it out properly yet. But if she knew the number of children who've attended the school over the past 20 years, and assuming that each ate 3 potatoes a day, she could work out how many potatoes she's peeled. The children eat at noon. At 1 they begin to clean up and prepare for the next day. Rita checks how many sacks of potatoes are left and takes down the order. She makes sure that they're stocked up for the week. As soon as she's done, she has a cup of tea with Linda, Aranda, and Katie. They've not been in the school as long as she has. Linda tells them about her son's school. It's so different, so much more organized, and she's having to fork out so much money. Aranda tells them about the curry she made the day before, enough to feed 17 people. Katie complains about her fiancé's new motorbike, and Rita tells them about Salvo. But there's not much to say about Salvo. Tell us about Malta. What is there to say about Malta? It's hot, innit? It's actually been a while since she left Malta. To conclude, Ivan Kalu states that other literatures can afford to undo the canon. Maltese literature, by contrast, must work to afford its canons. Despite his insistence that Maltese literature needs to work to form its canon, he also expresses a concern that it lacks the structure and the foundation to perform this task, for even though literary prizes exist, not to mention syllabi 6 from the university, they are not enough. There is a lack of consistent critical engagement. There are no serious literary reviews, no editors, and no agents to work with publishers and writers. Perhaps not having a canon is no bad thing. After all, it's easy to conceive of a canon in which women are entirely absent, not to mention the impossibility of imagining a canon that includes the absent women who have been forgotten, the female kasharos, whose names have not been left behind. Above all, perhaps the canon is being established through the European Prize for Literature that is awarded in European Union member states every 3 years. 3 Maltese authors have won that prize to date. Of course, they all happen to be male. I have no quarrel with these awards. These are men whose work I admire immensely, believe me. At the same time, it is events such as the one we're all attending today which allow us to redraw boundaries, that provide a space in which the literature of others and other literature can be recounted. So my aim here was to give you a taste, a very small taste, of some of the verses which few are able to read outside the confines of our island. And then again, you invited me here today, and I chose to leave behind some names I am familiar with. Others I left out. Believe me when I say that others, other writers and other critics would probably have given you a very different picture of what Maltese literature is. But that's inevitable, no? Even Camilla, she too is the subject of contradictory narratives. Everyone has their own version. Everyone tells the story that they know, And so I leave you with a few fragments about this woman whose job, apparently, is to write epitaphs for her neighbors, and whom some claim to have seen lowering her hair from the balcony to let men climb up to her. One fine day, in the house where the anthropologist Jeremy Bossevin lived for a number of years, Camilla Petroni turned up, chewing on a fusty smell in her mouth and writing epitaphs for people. It was a while ago now, maybe 10 years, something like that, I think. That house with two facades, I've always thought of it as the house belonging to Bossevin, the anthropologist, though everyone called him Jerry. He lived there with his wife Inga and lots of books and furniture that he'd brought back from all the places he'd visited. He lived there and wrote about the Maltese, the Nasharin, the Festas. He came back recently, the professor. He came back on his own, sporting this thick cobweb of a beard. Came down for a holiday, and I told him that after he left, the house was rented out to Camilla Petroni from Milan, a writer and a thinker. And unlike him, she never said a word to anyone, except for me, and maybe the cleaning lady. Before she moved to Nashar, she lived in Sanglia with her lover. The last time he spoke to her was on a Monday morning. He told her that he had no more words for her. The spring had dried up. That's how Camilla put it to me, anyway. By midday, he'd put out all her things, which over the years they'd lived together, had spread all over the house, put them out in cardboard boxes on the doorstep and on the pavement outside the front door. That day, with her eyes the color of the void, she turned her back on the boxes strewn outside his front door, empty-handed. That town would never curl up in her lap again. That old town, that small house, as old as the town itself, the sooty steps of that street, they'd never shine in her eyes again. Very soon, the steps that led from the house down to the shore, and from the shore back, began to age, as did the distance between them. That too began to age, the way her long hair began to age, just like that, all of a sudden. They say, apparently, that she had this nobleman. Now, I don't know where she found this nobleman, because here's what I say, there isn't any nobility left in this country anymore. But people say all sorts of things. No, mister, isn't that right? Some said, when she came to live here, that he'd kicked her out. And others said she'd found him hanging off one of the beams in the kitchen. And others said it was the Senglians who drove her out. And some say this, some say that. Because there's those whose mother-in-law is from Sanglia and their son's wife is from Sanglia, or their cousins or a friend of a friend. And there's those who catch the rumors from here and from there. They've all said their piece. That much I can tell you. And she certainly never spoke to a soul, which means that nobody knows the truth. But people say all sorts of things. No, mister. Like, no, what they said once. They said he'd been found chopped up into pieces. Because people talk and talk. That's right. They said he'd been found chopped up into pieces in a black bag on the pavement, and whoever had done him had left their initials as well. PDM. Now PDM, that can't be Camilla, right, mister? So why don't the police find out who's responsible for these deeds, is what I want to know. I don't know, Camilla never mentioned that he died. That was started by Tessie, that fiend, because she's a fiend. She is that Tessie, you know. She's the one who started the rumor that Camilla had murdered someone. Of course it was her. Who else do you think it was? You shouldn't believe everything you hear, mister. You know, this is a small village and people say all sorts of things to make themselves look good. Me, I do the cleaning for her. Did anyhow, because I don't anymore now. I'm telling you what I'm telling, because I know, because I saw it with my own eyes and heard it with my own ears. Meaning, I'm not making it up. Thank you.